let's continue to read these things, not just for the sake of the history of how sustainability efforts on the global stage have evolved through these conferences, but also how the wording has corresponded to what was happening at the time. And considering the serious uh, lack of progress, let's say, in actually implementing these, I have many other podcasts where we keep looking at progress on sustainable development goals and how countries are doing their synergizing between sustainable development goals, nationally determined contributions, economic development, national adaptation plans, and so on. So you can see that there is a kind of a time dependent evolution of these concepts, but ultimately the environmental conscience has evolved, and the key question still remains: what does it mean in terms of actual implementation, especially as a collective action which requires lots of funding for the developing countries to keep up with their climate change impacts and think of sustainability, beyond coping. They have to build resilience and then get to sustainability, and everybody is committing to net zero. So we have many steps to go. So let's read a bit about Johannesburg 2002. We have been talking about the conferences before that. 1992 Rio is an important one as a milestone. In 2002 it was South Africa's turn to host a world conference. It was now 10 years after the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro, and the event is often referred to as Rio+10 or Earth Summit 2002. Its formal name is, however, the World Summit on Sustainable Development, and was held in Johannesburg. We'll see a picture of the picture of Johannesburg in the next slide. The book uses the city, the several photos as props, which is cute. Anyway, so although resulting, the key point here is that actually George W. Bush was elected as the president, and he was not a big believer in climate change. He had, he's from Texas, so he had his mindset coming from oil country, and he in fact backed out of the Kyoto Protocol and obviously didn't participate in the Johannesburg 2002 and boycotted. So we were talking about end of the World War II, Cold War, Russian bloc boycotting the sustainability conferences before, and now it's the USA that was boycotting. So everybody is protecting their turf. So collective action is always going to be suffering from leadership issues in this sense, let alone financing and other collective actions needed. So although the resulting declaration, called the Johannesburg Declaration on Sustainable Development, or just the Johannesburg Declaration, clearly builds on the declaration, the two earlier declarations from the two earlier world conferences, it is this time more generally written and gives even less clear direction. So that's what I mean by the timestamp on when they were developed. So there is lots of good ideas here. We'll see how the various things are mentioned in terms of all the sectors that need to be covered, and yet they remain kind of motherhood statements. So this is Johannesburg, beautiful place. Johannesburg, Cape Town, Africa in general needs to be on everybody's bucket list. The Johannesburg Declaration has 37 paragraphs divided under the headings: from our origins to our future, from Stockholm to Rio de Janeiro to Johannesburg, the challenges we face, our commitment to sustainable development, multilateralism is the future, and making it happen. So very nice coverage, very nice document. I always love looking at the schematics and the photos and the figures and the data. It's always some good points to summarize from a pedagogical point of view, but in terms of actual implementation, it's again leaves us wishing for more, right? But nonetheless, it reaffirmed a commitment and collective responsibilities and refers to past conferences and documents. So if you read what are all covered here, looks at the ever increasing gap between the rich and poor. The declaration spells out biodiversity loss, depleted fish stocks, pollution, desertification, increasingly frequent and devastating natural disasters, and climate change as evident sustainability challenges. So obviously we are covering, academically speaking, all the key topics, but again, action. The declaration then continues by presenting our commitment to sustainable development in 15 paragraphs, starting with the strength in our diversity, the need for solidarity and cooperation over boundaries, importance of gender equality, vital role of indigenous people, importance of regional cooperation, the special circumstances of small island states, the importance of developed countries to reach the internationally agreed levels of official development assistance, the importance of increased income generating opportunities, and the roles of private sector to contribute to sustainable development and to enforce corporate accountability. So from 2002 to 2024, when I'm recording this, you can imagine how much progress has been made on each of these. So then the question is this the way humanity works? Collective action is really important, and being at the table discussing is really important. Putting down such declarations is really key, and then we need the next step on how to actually bring about action, right? So Johannesburg Declaration asserts our resolve to promptly increase access to basic requirements, again starting with various needs and wants. Basic requirements such as water, sanitation, food, shelter, healthcare, energy, and to protect biodiversity. Just lovely coverage of all the things. Declaration places particular focus on conditions that pose severe threats to sustainable development, such as chronic hunger and malnutrition, armed conflict and occupation, natural disasters, terrorism, organized crime and illicit drugs, illegal arms trade, trafficking, corruption, intolerance and xenophobia, and endemic diseases. Right? So I won't continue to read more, but I want to give you a sense that all possible angles of sustainable development in the human context are discussed and written into documents. The declaration then ends by asserting the commitment to the plan of implementation of the World Summit on Sustainable Development and by pledging determination to realize our collective hope for sustainable development. That brings us back to Rio de Janeiro in 2012, which again got a lot of attention in an attempt to revitalize the momentum created by the first Rio conference. The last World Conference on Sustainable Development went, so it says last because the book was published before, well before 2024, so we have to go back and look at where we are now, but let's continue with this. The last World Conference on Sustainable Development went back to Brazil and is referred to as Rio+20. However, its official name is the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, and it happened back in Rio de Janeiro in 2012. And more importantly, it was a gigantic event, the largest in the history of the United Nations, with 192 states, 105 heads of state, government or their deputies, 487 governmental ministers, as well as numerous intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, and private companies. Including all the hundreds of side events, almost 50,000 people participated in one way or another in the conference. This and not including the more or less equal number of protesters in downtown Rio de Janeiro. So here is Rio de Janeiro with its iconic statue of is it Jesus Christ, I hope, or Mother Mary. Please check. I think it's Jesus Christ. Okay, sorry about that. I'm not a religious person, not to say I should be ignorant, but nonetheless, the idea of heads of states and ministers, heads of state and ministers attending is to say the countries are showing commitment commitment of resources, planning, strategies, mainstreaming these ideas into their fiscal policies, national economic development plans, nationally determined contributions, and so on, which came much later. But still, the commitment is commendable just in terms of the attendance, but where does it leave us now? The two main themes of the conference were a green economy, which was what stirred most of the protests, and the institutional framework for sustainable development. So why does green economy lead to protests? Because it has to retrain and ensure livelihoods of people who are going to be lost in the transition, if such a transition does happen, because you will be phasing out the old technology, let's say, of coal plants, coal mines, coal power plants, internal combustion engine, car productions, and so on and so forth. So this has happened, and elections have been won and lost because of playing on these workers who felt cheated when climate actions lead to changes in technology or socio-technical transitions, and they are left behind. So we obviously have to worry about that. Okay, what else can I read here? Well, the three preceding conferences resulted in relatively condensed declarations complemented by more detailed plans. The Rio+20 conference resulted in only one substantial document called The Future We Want. This document of 53 pages and 283 paragraphs is divided into 6 main sections called Our Common Vision, Renewing Political Commitment, Green Economy in the Context of Sustainable Development and Poverty Eradication, Institutional Framework for Sustainable Development, Framework for Action and Follow-up, and Means of Implementation. Implementation is always been, has always been a focus, and that's what makes it painful to actually see whether we have really accomplished the things. There are many sections. I won't read all of them, but let's read one, for example. The first main section consists of 13 paragraphs reaffirming the commitment to an economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable future for our planet and for present and future generations, to accelerate the achievement of agreed upon development goals, to the UN Charter, human rights law, and other international law, and to strengthen international cooperation to address the persistent challenges related to sustainable development. So, despite the preceding conferences, we are talking about persistent challenges to sustainable development. Obviously, those challenges still continue 12 years after the Rio 2012, right? The second main section focuses 42 paragraphs on renewing political commitment and is divided into 3 subsections called Reaffirming the Rio Principles and Past Action Plans, Advancing Integration, Implementation and Coherence, Engaging Major Groups and Other Stakeholders. So you get the idea that the grand ideas are being carried forward, expanded upon, made more up-to-date, current, and so on, and still we are here. The third main section includes 19 paragraphs describing the ideas of a green economy as one important tool for sustainable development. The pandemic has come and gone, and we are still struggling on how socio-political and other perturbations end up hurting these good plans. A green economy is an economy that results in improved human well-being and social equity while significantly reducing the environmental risks and ecological scarcities. Again, fantastic statements, how to convert them into action. The fourth main section focuses 29 paragraphs on developing the institutional framework for sustainable development with 5 subsections called Strengthening the 3 Dimensions of Sustainable Development, Strengthening Intergovernmental Arrangements for Sustainable Development, Environmental Pillar in the Context of Sustainable Development, International Financial Institutions and United Nations Operational Activities, and regional, national, subnational, and local levels. Really, really great ideas. The fifth main section of the Rio+20 document is the most substantively by far and sorry. The fifth main section of the Rio+20 document is the most substantive by far and focuses on presenting a framework for action and follow-up. Action, I love it. It includes 148 paragraphs divided into two subsections called thematic areas and cross-sectoral issues with 141 paragraphs, and sustainable development goals with 7 paragraphs. So we have addressed the sustainable development goals in various podcasts before, in adaptation, mitigation, and so on. There are 17 goals which address, basic access to water, energy, education, healthcare, exploiting marine resources sustainably, land resources, all the good things one can think about, right? So it's always great. I won't go into more details here, but managing disaster risk is emphasized as a central requisite for sustainable development. Again, you have to be careful here, because managing disaster risk means having the data and mapping the risks, which by IPCC conventions are defined as the multiplier of hazards, exposures, and vulnerabilities. And now in AR6, the latest assessment report response has been added. So disaster risk management and response are critical, but it's also about going beyond coping with disasters and managing the risk, which means building in resilience as well. Okay, so the sixth and the last main section of the Rio+20 document focuses on means of implementation, including 32 paragraphs divided in 5 subsections called finance, technology, capacity building, trade, registry of commitments, and registry of commitments. So this is a critical section that does give attention to implementation. The document emphasizes the importance of developing, adapting, disseminating, and transferring of environmentally sound technologies, especially in and to developing countries, to make vital information, knowledge, and solutions available to all. The importance of capacity building is emphasized as a vital pathway for sustainable development, and trade is reaffirmed as an engine for development and sustained economic growth. So these struggles of technology transfers, intellectual property, etc. still continue, because there is money to be made. So nobody is going to hand over these things for free, or even for a good price. So these negotiations have to basically build on the idea that the entire global system of economy, trade, supply chains, everything are only as resilient as the weakest country in the chain. So if Philippines or some other country keeps getting hit with typhoons with stronger and stronger and more rapidly evolving intensities, then that supply chain perturbation, which we learned from the 2011 typhoon Haiyan, that just tracking coconut products from Philippines through the world to the rest of the world could be quantified in terms of GDP impacts on other countries. So it's good in a way that globally connected economies are dependent on each other. Hence, it must be considered a important requirement to share technologies and intellectual properties to make sure that we all thrive together, so that tragedies of the commons do not occur, that triumph of the commons are possible when we do this, that it's a non-zero sum game, so everybody can benefit. But that's more of a preaching than reality. So we'll leave it here and come back and look at the evolution of ideas concerning sustainable development and how the environmental conscience actually evolved during these conferences, and why, despite the lack of progress, these are still important in terms of continuing the collective discussions, negotiations, agreements, declarations, plans for implementation, and so on.